Chapter 21 Thoughts Personified. It was the longest stretch of time, not in minutes or hours, days or years, but time as it is perceived, warped and mangled into the substance by which beings mark their existence. With so much attention and memory devoted to such a little fraction of that which is moved through, time can feel attenuated, as though we are brushing past the present into a never-captured future. Yet, in those times when stress owns a person's mind, when mortal awareness due to the possibility of imminent death does arise, time perceived as smoothness takes the back seat to total human awareness. Like the bacteria that keeps itself in check within a human until the threat of death, at which point it begins the process of taking the body of the human down, so does human consciousness keep itself in check until such a threat arises. With nothing to lose, the unleashed consciousness will recall every and all that the human has experienced and all the ways in which to understand that which the human has lived through. Go for broke, the bacteria and consciousness consider, and unleash their power, which they had held restricted, for the sensible continuity of the life they inhabit and, some could say, are. There are times, though, when the individual perception can be wrong in the assumption of imminent death. Given a glimpse over the precipice into the yawning maw which marks the end of life's playing field, a person can get the abridged version of their entire life's experience, the flash of one's life before one's eyes. Time does not have dominion over the module of mind that perceives it in such dire circumstances as death or near death, much like depth holds no control over the cube that wants to examine its own length and width. What might be an inscrutable, minuscule fraction of perceived time in the passage of shared reality could very well feel like rolling epochs and periods during which entire galactic monuments from some ancient and divine race are formed, forgotten, and vanish into the nothing from whence they came. Having had inklings of such, and passive awareness that humans might have an internal system like that which could account for the notions of eternal life, the afterlife, and concepts of paradise and perdition, Gary was thrust into a full-bodied embrace with the notion in the nanoseconds in which his balance ceased atop the crane while moving his harness lock from one guardrail to the other. His foot off the catwalk while his hand could not feel the rail he knew should be in place where his hand was reaching for it, his equilibrium shifted as the catwalk moved slightly in the wind that foretold the coming rains in the distance. Small traces of his senses crumbled, and it felt as though his breathing came to an abrupt stop. He felt no requirement for air, and his muscles seemed to need no electrical impulses catalyzing their locomotion. Even the roar of the wind, as it passed over his ears, dropped in pitch until it seemed to fall away completely. He stood as though he was a statue carved from time, a photograph of a most inopportune moment captured on a film of reality. It was not as though time slowed, but stopped moving altogether. He thought he was going to die, and then came the reassuring thought that the last thought was not just a thought, but a truth. The one truth he knew came from the moment he was born. Yet it was not a terrible circumstance, this inevitability, as he would die, and whereas it was he could have died at any point since the start of his life, but he didn't before, and perhaps it was so that he could know life, and know it in the ways that only he as an individual would ever know. There were flashes of emotions that held no images but feelings that were known when he lived through them, thinking that they were of the greatest importance, or that they were in need of being repressed. The emotional flashes coincided with waves of visions, memories from his point of view, tastes and aromas that mingled in his life, sensations of all kinds that graced his skin, the sound of unknown origins, and music that elevated his sense of being above the physical. He was met with imaginations and visions he had had through life, and uncertainties of all sorts, frustrations and elations, anxieties and relief. He watched as he behaved in ways that he would have despised if he saw another do it, and then saw him overlook admirable actions from others. He saw his activities be celebrated and minimized, and times when he was a goodness simply for the sake of being such. All those moments rendered to a seeming null, since they were for no reason than for him to know them, for all their shame and glory, known only in their totality by him, and not even while he was living through them, since he had view of the experiences and their wide-stretching effect upon the world that he had not previously imagined. He could see the ripples of influence that brought him to his moments of living, and their origins in the actions of others that he was at the time peripherally aware of, if at all. And what was there for him to know? All of this beauty and horror in a world run by the colliding opposing forces of existence and oblivion that each represented was beyond the scope of any one person to conceive, never mind have any understanding of, and forget about controlling it. There were boundaries and scathing repercussions that guided in one instance and vanished in the next. The mess was one that he could see, yet found no cause to grasp. Even his beautiful daughter, to whom he was absolutely devoted, would find a way to be clear of him, as she would eventually, in all regards. As he was so impetuous as to lean her toward the dangers of free living over the security of continual living, would she not be better without him? She would find her way and antagonize him, and he would be left without her in the end, as she ventured into the mess of the world, eventually coming to the understanding of it that he had reached, but would never be able to communicate properly to her, as it would defy description in all ways other than experience. Maybe if he could speak 3 words simultaneously, he could do it, but that would require him to not have the limited body he held to, which he could let go of at any time. He could be truly free, and let his wife guide their daughter well. The insurance would cover them financially, and then she could teach the daughter to live safely. But then the girl would inevitably rebel. It would require a balance of the 2 sides for the girl to pick the path that best suits her, and trying to preach both freedom and security, liberty and safety in living example that could shape the choices of their daughter. That would tear his wife apart. If balance was needed, he was required. And it wasn't for his daughter's sake of growing and living well and good, but for the unsustainable chore doing such would be, for her mother if her father ceased to be, that he strove to the idea of balance that shifts and alters in alignment with the unbalanced nature of the world. He felt his back first, and a fire of clenching muscles brought his sentience back to his arm that extended further as he bent in an odd way, attempting to maintain his stature while searching. He felt only the void occupied by churning gases in the atmosphere through the fingers of his gloves, and in the next instant sensed the cold and seemingly unbendable cylinder of steel that comprised the guardrail. He heard a growl that emanated from his chest and rumbled upward into his throat. Movement returned as he gripped the guardrail, and he thought he heard himself say his wife's name. His foot hit the catwalk, and he flipped the dangling harness lock into his hand, securing it to the guardrail of the cat ladder immediately. The wind bowed, breezing by, with a knowing wink as he stood feeling the pounding of his heart. He made his way down the ladder with careful and deliberate steps, gripping the rail extra tight when the wind picked up on 2 occasions during his descent. When he reached the bottom and unhooked the lock, he took off his helmet and wiped his brow. He walked across the site and heard one of the men from one of the lift crews talking. "The weather is not that bad. We have clear skies. Why is he down here?" Gary turned and looked at the man with the deep quality wrought by his vision atop the ladder penetrating the man's eyes. The guy was struck by the expressionless stare, and welcomed as Raoul chimed in to call his attention away with an admonishment. "The wind is transparent, and don't joke. You wouldn't last 30 seconds up there." Gary walked to the clock and took his time card from the column next to it. He knew that the rains were coming in, and when the others saw him do it, they made their ways toward the clock as well. He walked off the site, through the fence and towards his car, He took off his vest, harness, and helmet near his open trunk and deposited them. As two people walked by, he heard one comment that the weatherman was wrong and now they were stuck carrying around their umbrella all day. He laughed silently to himself, knowing what the winds were bringing. He opened his car door and took his phone from the glove compartment. He turned it on and closed his car door, starting the car and letting it idle as he typed a text to his wife. Heavy weather, done today. Would you meet me at Metal? He sent the text and started toward the small restaurant he mentioned. He heard a ding and did not wait to stop at a red light. He pulled to the side of the road. Absolutely, love. Be there in 10. The kissing emoji was super sweet at this point, and he found it funny that such a ridiculous little pictorial representation of an intimate action could infuse him with the comfort of being loved by his wife. He got to the restaurant first and took one of the high tables near the bar. He ordered a mocktail and the plate of appetizers he knew she liked. He asked the waiter to leave the menu at the table for her use when she arrived. He sipped a glass of water and looked at the rest of the people in the establishment. He liked this place because it was a blend of hard reality and elegant culture. The old metalwork shop that had been renovated into a restaurant, it just felt like a good fit for him. He did not really have a reason why he liked this place before now, but it had been his favorite of places he and Nadia went to on their date nights. How did he get here? He wondered how much of his life was hidden from him. He was sitting at this restaurant that he felt reflected his own sensibilities, waiting for the mother of his child to meet him for an impromptu date on an afternoon when he had finished early at a job that kept him engaged and excited about his life. How did he get to this point? Was he riding on kindness of some unseen forces, or were those forces that he didn't know constituting luck? How could he get himself here on his own? He could not even be a father with others, and that was what he thought was his favorite feeling to have. He thought back to his time courting Nadia, and the times of their marriage when they disagreed. He even thought of how there were parts of her that he was so at odds with that he could not imagine being with a person who was she, or at least as she let herself appear to be. He thought about how his own life was a torrent of experiences that he only had. And some of them, like the one on the crane today, were large in their effect and something enormous to him and him only. Those battles he had with his own sense of existence, they were not unique to him, or rather, his version of them were unique to him, but everyone had their own unique way of experiencing them. He wondered what existential perturbations Nadia went through that he would never know in total, even if she tried to express it. Maybe she did try to express it, but he was just not susceptible to those expressions. As his flavored drink arrived at the table, he wondered, how did I get her? Through the tall, tinted glass windows along the wall, he watched the car he knew to be hers pull into the parking lot. The waiter placed the drink on the table and Gary thanked him. He saw her get out of the car and walk toward the front door. He stood up and lifted his drink. When she stepped inside, he lifted his glass high. To the woman my heart knows is the most beautiful person, he toasted her. He sipped his drink while she smiled and looked around at the eyes of the other people that were directed to her by her husband's loud voice. He put his glass on the table and moved around when she neared to pull her chair out for her, but he stopped when she was close. He looked at her and hugged her tight, feeling the greatest sense of relief as she hugged him back. They pulled apart and kissed, but not the usual peck on the cheek that they had become accustomed to. Lips pressed with the sheer heat of love for the other. He pulled her chair, and she sat to see him sit across the table from her. I am glad you are, she said, emphasizing the last word to express her love for him.